Today's webinar is going to be about a new extension that was added in 2019-12, and this corresponds with all the other packages and the core stuff that we're releasing. And today I'm particularly excited. Ivo, do you want to know why I'm excited?
I absolutely do.
So the way I usually do these webinars is I start a little early in the morning and try to build the demo the morning of, number one, to cut down on the amount of time it takes to prepare them, but it's also a good exercise to kind of test out that the things that I'm showing really are simple, and that it's not too difficult, and I didn't spend all week to make something and then telling you that it's simple. That said, you know, making a demo has its problems and things come up and I encounter trouble. Today I woke up and I started to build the demo that I'm going to show you, and it was as easy as it's supposed to be, and I think that's nice. So what I'm going to show you today is a new extension we're calling svyNavigation, and it's really a combination of a few things. Number one, it's a lightweight API for generating navigation events within an application, so going from screen to screen, and also sort of capturing what happened when there's a navigation event so you can respond to things in your application. So an API is nice, but we find that when we give someone an API, we have to explain to them how to use it, and you know, it's not out of the box, it's just an API. So what we'd like to do with this one is we held off on releasing it until we had a sort of reference user experience. And we took the most common kind of navigation setup that we're seeing, which is sort of a side navigation menu with maybe a Navbar across the top. And we made a UX template for that that's already hooked up to the API and just works. But at the same time, we understand that people want total UX freedom, so we made that template extensible so that you can customize it, and you can also provide your own implementations if you want to. So everything that I'm going to show you from a UI point of view is totally flexible, but you get this out of the box. So with that said, I'd like to jump into the demo. So what I'm showing you here is probably something that looks familiar. It's a simple application with customers and orders, and we can navigate between them. The first part that I want to show you is really just how I set up navigation, and then we're going to get into some more complex navigation scenarios. But really what I have 4 screens. I have a customers list and a customer detail, an orders list, and an order detail. And so what I want to be able to do is click on a customer, jump in there with that customer, maybe go back and click on the orders, and then jump in here and look at that order and move around that way. The other thing I might want to do is be able to click on a customer, look at their orders, and click on an order and look at the order. Also, from an order point of view, I might want to say, oh, this is this customer here, and I want to navigate from the order directly to the customer. So I'm going to walk through setting these things up and how to get these scenarios. So let's jump into the IDE, and what I'm going to start with first is my my main navigation form. So in order to start this this entire application, what I've done is I've included in my the IDE is responding slowly, usually from GoToMeeting. I've included in my build path here the new extension that we provided called svyNavigation, and that actually includes a module svyNavigation UX, which is providing the navigation is the API, and the navigation UX is the sort of UI implementation. Okay, and then what I've done is included those as modules, and for my solution, I made a form. The first form here I call nav main, and this is the sort of side navigation with the menu bar across the top that you're seeing. Let me get rid of these warnings here that I'm getting in developer. So then what I did is I created this form, but it's an extension. So I'm using form inheritance of a base form, and that base form comes from the svyNavigation UX module. So if I look at the properties of this form, you can see that it extends the svyNavigation UX. That's a bit hard to see from the properties, but I picked this form as my base form, and all the instructions for this are on the wiki for this project. So when I get that, I get I get UI out of the box, but I also am getting some functionality. So I get all these methods that are inherited through form inheritance. And what I have to do is go in and override a few methods. So the first thing I want to do is get the navigation items to show up. So there's a method in there called load menu items. And what I did is I followed the instructions on the wiki and I added a few items. So what I want to do is create a menu item object, and I use the type that ships with this extension called a svyNav menu item. And really, it just takes a few properties. The ID in this case is really the name of the form that I want to show, and then what the display text is. That could be anything, it could be ITN, etc. And then if I want, I can do an icon style class. So I put in an icon there, and I add it to my array. Basically, at the end of this, it needs to return an array. So I have two forms here, customers and orders. If I do nothing else and I do that, I get this functionality that I can click in the menu back and forth between customers and orders. So the rest is done for me. I don't have to handle a click event. I don't have to build the menus and put them into the element. It's just a quick override of this method. So the next thing that I would show you is how I can navigate, say, from the customer list to the customer detail, because you'll notice there's not a customer detail or list here. The list is in the menu, but I don't really want to show the detail in the menu. However, I still want to be able to navigate to it, and I want it to show up where it's supposed to show up, etc. So just again, to review the functionality, I'm going to just pick a customer here, and when I click on it, I'm sorry, I'm on a order screen. I'm going to pick a customer here, and when I click on that customer, you can see I go to the customer detail, and I get some information there. So what I've done here is in the customers table view form, I'm handling the on-cell click event of that grid. And grids are a whole nother subject. We have a few webinars about them, so I'm not going to get into the UI and stuff. Just that when you click on it, it calls this method, and I have this form called show customer detail. So there's just two lines of code I need to do here. One is I create a navigation item. So if I had already shown it and I wanted to recall it, it's another complex scenario. I could refer to it by ID. But in this case, I'm just going to make it new. And I just pass in the name of the form. And then I call the svyNavigation API, and it opens that for me. So when I'm on the list here, it's calling that, and then it shows this form in the same context. Now, another use case that I'd like to show you is when I went from the customer to the order record. How am I getting the right record? So showing a form is one thing, and by the way, I'm just using the same found set that gets generated for any customer form, so I'm not using separate found sets or named found sets or related data. So those of you that are new to Servoy, I didn't have to do anything special to keep these records in sync. The record that I'm picking here is the record that shows up in the detail. That happens by default in Servoy. Now, the next use case that I'm talking about is suppose I see an order in here that I want to know more about. I click on that order. It now goes to that order records screen, but it's also the right order. So I had to do one extra step and specify some data to load. So if we look at the form customer details, again, in the on-cell click of the grid that shows the orders for that customer, the related orders, again, I have this type of method where I create the navigation item just like before. However, in this example, I also want to pass in some related data. So what do? I grab my customers to orders found set, and I get selected record. And that's specified as the data to load in this svyNavigation open method. If I mouse over this, you'll see I get all the doc. It's a self-documenting API. Of course, this is all in the wiki as well with examples, etc. And you can see that there's an optional argument that I put in for this example, data to show, and you can pass in a few things like a record, an entire found set, as well as a QB select object if you wanted to pass in some custom query and have that be run against the target form. So that's all I had to do was add this one extra line of code, and that's what is making sure that when I navigate to, say, this order here with a total of 718, I'm really getting, you can see the total up here, I'm really getting the right order that I chose because I'm able to specify it. Now, I didn't tell it that, hey, go and load these records. That was done implicitly. I want to look at another use case where, again, I'm navigating to a related record, but I'm also kind of changing the options a bit, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So in this use case, suppose I want to navigate from the order to the customer. So when I click on this, it goes back to the customer, or to the customer if I wasn't just there. And the way that I do this, if I look at the order detail record, I have a method here, show customer, that happens, that's being called from that little button that I put next to the customer field. And there's one other thing I want to show here. There's something about custom data which I'm going to get to in a minute. But this looks just like the previous method, but I add one more option, and that's the selection type. And you get a few options here. Select record is, rather than load a record, there's only a few customers in this database, I think 91 in the sample database. So they're already loaded by default. So what I want to do is keep that list. This has to do with sort of caching. That list is already cached, and I just want to select it because I know it's already in the list. As a developer, I know it's already in the list. So I'm using the select record option so that suppose I were to go navigate to a list form, it wouldn't just have one record, it would have all the records, yet it would select the right record. So there's a semantic difference there between the other options, which are to load or to select. Now, one little caveat I would point out is that there's a way to, so if it's already cached, it will select it. But there's also a way to, there's also another option called force select. And this is a bit of an edge case, but suppose you had a really large table and also the found set that that's going to be returned, so it's not filtered by something, and it could just go on and on to the end of the table. And you're saying I want to select this record and it's not cached, and you want to force it, then it will actually go and load the records and then select in order and then select that record. But if that was a really big table, you wouldn't want that to happen. So there's another option called force selection, but I would say there's a warning in it in the documentation and everything to know that it could be expensive. Anyway, that's just a little caveat. The thing I want you to remember is that I can select or load. It's optional. Okay.
Mind if I interrupt you for a second, Sean?
Sure.
So I just posted in the chat box that Johan released about 2 minutes ago the RC2 candidate. Mm-hmm. So the link to the forum should be available for everybody in the chat box. The other one is, I think there's a question that might be a good time to ask you right now.
Sure.
Since you are in a, well, let me tell you what the question is. By changing from the customer detail to the related order, the highlighted navigation doesn't change?
Yes. Right. So as I was in customers and I went to the detail and then to the order, the point is that this could be updated. I can actually show when I get into handling navigation events, I can show how we could do that. Maybe it's also a candidate for an enhancement to the UX template that comes with this to identify navigation events and see if they match. In this case, the nav item is not technically the same as the one here because it has some custom data in it or records to load. But it could be ideal to highlight that if you just check the form. So we could actually do that after we get through the normal demo and fix that using one of the API hooks that are available. So that's a good question. There's one other thing I want to point out about just using the API when you navigate between things. And in order to set this up, I'm gonna do a couple steps. I'm gonna come into the orders list here. Oh, good. I already have it sorted descending by date because it just helps if I get like an order that's not going to be the first order of the customer. So I'm just gonna pick one of these here. This order number 11076. In this case, I want to navigate to the customer, but I also want to add a little bit of custom behavior. When I get to that customer record, I want to make sure that in that customer's list of orders, that this order is also selected for whatever reason. I'm just using as an example of some custom implementation. So what I'm going to do is click here, and I do get into, well, I don't show the order number, but if we go back, you can see the total is 825. And indeed, it was the order that was 825 here that is selected. And the reason I inverted the sort on that was because I wanted to make it so that it didn't default to the first one. I actually got the last one because it's sorted by creation or by date. So that's a little bit of extra, functionality I want to add in there that's custom to my own application or user experience that I want. And that was this part right here. So again, this is when I call show customer when I click in that order detail with the little arrow icon. I'm just passing in, I'm doing item set custom data, and I just pass in, really, I can pass in whatever I want because I'm going to pick it up in the other form. So if I go to the customer detail form and I look at the on show event, what I'm doing here, I want you to ignore some other stuff and just focus on this for the moment because we'll get to the other stuff right here. Is I'm going to pick up that custom data. So I call one line of code to the API, which is to get the current item. Then I get the custom data. And then if it has custom data and it has that property, select order ID, which is my own thing. That's not part of the API or the reference implementation. That's my own custom little packet that I want to send and then pick up. If it has that, then I want to call customers to orders dot select record on that ID. So that's what caused it to select that last record there, was that I'm sort of saying, hey, show the customer form, and by the way, select this order in the customer form. So that's how you can kind of inject a bit of custom behavior, a bit of it could be something else. It could be a filter you want to do, or something even related to the UI that you want to have show when the form shows, something like that. It's entirely up to you how you handle that. The idea is that you do it this way in a way that doesn't break encapsulation, that doesn't have you meddling inside that form from some other form scope. You can do it in a purely event-based way, which is the right way to do it. Something else you might have noticed is that I'm able to click this little X button here, and it actually goes back to where I was. So the simple example is I'm on a customer list. I click into this customer. I click the X. It goes back to the list. In the example where I went into an order and I clicked the X. It went back to where I was before. I clicked the X. It went back again. So again, that's something that I added to my form. You can see it if I come into my customer detail form and open this up in the form editor. You'll see that I have that little button there. So this is my own implementation, and then I handle that event right here on action back. And again, it's just a one-liner in the API, svyNavigation history.back. So you can go back and you can go next. And what it does is it brings back the prior item that you had. So that's how I'm able to do that easily. I want to talk about handling events as well. So for example, I want to know when navigation is happening. And there's really two ways you can go about this. You can know that an event is about to happen, and you can know that an event has happened, sort of like a before and after. And the use case that I'm going to use to illustrate this is, suppose that I go into this customer and I'm editing that customer, and I decide that instead of Germany, I'm going to move this customer to France. Okay. And then, but while I'm editing, I change my mind and I want to navigate back to the list. Aha, I have unsaved changes. What would I like to do? Do I want to save and go back to the list or continue editing? If I continue editing, It just leaves it as is until I actually do something like save, and then it goes back to the list. You can see that the country here is France, so the edit was made. So I want to talk a bit about how that was done, because it was done in a way that works, that's compatible with the navigation framework here, and of course could be put in a base form and done very generically. So the first thing that I did is in the customer detail form in the on show event, you may remember I told you to ignore the stuff at the top. Well, now you can pay attention to it. What I'm doing is registering a listener to receive navigation events only while the form is showing. And then what I do is I register this on navigation event, which is down here, and it receives this object, svyNavigation event. Again, you'll get code complete on all of that. It's one of these documented types. And I'm checking if it was a before close. So I don't care about after, it's called before close and after open. I care about before I'm about to navigate away. The API gives you a chance to check stuff and then reject it if you want to. And so what I do is I'm just checking for edits, in this case, just all edits. And then I ask the user, and if they choose save, then I save data and I return true. However, if they did anything else, so even if they didn't click cancel, but if I came in here, edited the form, and suppose that I didn't click this button, but I tried to click over here, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm trying to navigate away, it's going to give me that opportunity. And so if they do anything else other than say I want to save changes, then it returns false, and that's your exit. It blocks the next event, which is the open event, to open a new item, and it leaves you where you are. So it's a hook you get to be able to handle that. There's another feature of the sort of UX implementation that I didn't show, which is how to handle searching. This navigation, well, let me back up a bit. There's a navbar across the top. This is provided in the UX template. Again, the template is just a reference implementation. It's extensible, or you can throw it out and make your own and still use the same functionality. But in this example, I have a search box and I have a way to log out. So the logout is pretty simple. I click user, I log out. I can come back in, and you can see I'm logged back in. The other thing is I could search. So suppose I want to find all customers in Germany, and yeah, maybe with the word Tom in it, and I get one record. You'll notice that when I get one record, it goes to right to the detail form. But suppose that I just put this one, it stays on the list form. So that is not just specific to this form. This search bar sits outside in the sort of navigation framework, and it could be applied to any form. So when the customer table view is in its on show event, customer table view on show, the IDE is, oh, there we go. Just took a minute. I'm calling one method here to the svyNavigation UX. You'll notice the scope is different. It's not svyNavigation. svyNavigation is just API. It's purely API events and processing those. The UX has to deal with the actual template that you see. And I add this global search listener on search. You can see that's this method right down here. And what happens is it calls whatever handler you register, and it passes in the search text when it's called, and then you can handle it however you like. In this case, I use the common SVY search API. You could also use the pop-up filter, pass it to that like we showed in Wednesday's demo, and then it binds directly to the grid. So it's up to you what you want to do with that, but it's just a nice little way to handle that. I also want to talk a bit, I probably did this a bit out of order, of how I set up the navbar. Again, in that main nav, that form that I extended, and then I had to override a few methods, I also overrode the load navbar items. And this is a simple method that gets called when the form is initializing. You just have to override it and return back an array of navigation items. And so these have to do with the Navbar component, which is just one of our standard components that we ship. And you just provide the menu items for that, and it gets plugged into that menu. In addition to that, there's some canned functionality that goes with it, such as the search. So as this is one template, but we could also extend this template ourselves, as a developer, or also as we make updates to this project, we may add more and more functionality, like really, generic functionality, like logging out, like searching to this. So for this example, I create a menu item. In this case, the action name is that default navbar action search, and that gets picked up automatically. I don't have to do that, and then it calls any registered listeners. So that's what happens there. The other one is suppose it's a custom one, and I add the user menu, and then I add a user sub menu down here, and the log out is the action that I handle custom. So then what you want to do is override the on navbar menu item clicked event and handle any default menu items that happen there. And this is where I handle the logout one. So this is sort of the same way you would implement a navbar, but it's already plugged into the framework, and it has some default actions in it, like that global search, which gets handled for you automatically. So that's how that was set up as well. So I think that concludes everything from the demo part, and I can run through a quick overview of what we saw. And I promise to go quickly, but I just want to make sure it's clear. Again, I know it's a lot of info to take in, but keep in mind that I started working on the demo this morning to be able to prove that it can be done quickly, and I followed the instructions on the wiki, and I really had no problems. So the first thing I did is I extended that navigation UX template form, that svyNav base form, and I overrode two methods. I overrode the menu items method and the navbar items method. Then what I did is I started playing with the API. I got the default navigation by default. I didn't have to do anything for that, but then I started to play with the API, and I took it from the simple case to the more complex case. So I was able to open forms by ID, so from list to detail. I was able to go from one entity to another entity, say customers to orders or orders to customers, by using the options of data that can be loaded. I also played around with the options of selecting a record versus loading a specific record, and that has more to do with what stays in your cache in your found set. Then I started playing with the history, and I just put a history back in all of the detail forms, and I was able to go back to where I was coming from. Then what I started to do is play with the custom object. So I wanted to be able to show an order, go from an order to a customer, but then have that customer's orders select that order. And I used the set custom data on the nav item object. And then I handled the custom action in the on show event. So there's a lot of different use cases for that. One could be custom filters, something with the UI. The bottom line is you do it the right way without breaking encapsulation. Then I started to play with the events, and I add and remove navigation listeners in the on-show events and the on-hide events. I didn't show the on-hide, but by the way, in on-hide, I do remove the listener, and that's kind of important. And then I handle that before close, so and I'm able to block it by returning false, so I force them to save records or to cancel. And then finally, I showed you how you can plug in that global search listener to the menu item that you initialize, and you can search however you like with that. So while we take questions and answers, I'm going to leave up a link to the project and to the wiki. This is also available through the package manager. So if you bring up the package manager in the IDE, you can include it in your project. Also, we covered a lot this week, but we didn't even get through all of the new stuff. So when we come back in the new year, we have some updates to the security module that is a lot like this, some default UX templates and some more extended functionality that we'd like to announce. So although this webinar series about the launch is over, we'll be back with more updates every 2 weeks in the new year. Ivo, I'm ready for questions.
Awesome. Good job.
Thank you.
Maybe I've got a little challenge for you. Can you show us how to build a blank screen?
You mean like start with a new screen and plug it in?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's a good idea. Let's do that in under 2 minutes if we can. So what I'm what I'm going to do is create a new form. In this case, I'm going to make it based off of the employees table, and I'm going to click finish. And then, well, it's a little slow with the IDE and the GoToMeeting at the same time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a grid on here, and I'm going to sort of blow that grid up a bit. And I'm going to put a column on there for the employee name. Let's do, well, I think I have a calculation for their display name. There we go. And a title. Okay. So now we have a form with a grid on it that works on the employee screen. So then what I'd like to do is go back to my main nav JS form and remember this load menu items. And I'm just going to copy this because that's how I roll. And we want to say this is employees. And the name of my form was employees. And I don't want it to say orders. I'm employees. So let's call it sales rep. And well, we want it to look like a person. So we'll do the font awesome user icon. And that should be enough. So I need that to sort of reinitialize. So I'm going to relaunch the client. Try this again. There we go. Yeah, I didn't set a default first form, but so we come in here. This is what it looked like at the start of the demo. So now I have sales reps here. And when I click on it, I get a list of my sales reps. So I hope that was under 2 minutes, but that's how you do it. And then you can start plugging stuff in. So if I wanted to go to, say, my order screen, I didn't name these in a consistent way, and I want to, well, I know I have an employee, the sales rep for that order, sitting on the screen here, and I'm going to do a copy paste on this button. And on action, I'm going to make a new method in the form called show sales rep, create private, okay, and show. And I'm going to copy some stuff here.
Still timing you, by the way.
Yeah, well, we're over 2 minutes now, but I did make the screen, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then I'm going to open this, and let's just copy this because I like that select record option here because I know there's only a few employees. So in this case, it's not orders to, hello, it's orders to employees. Boy, I'm really waiting when I click around here. And we do want to select record, so I think that's right, except for this should be employees. It's the name of the form. So I save everything, and I don't think I need to reload. But if I come into the order here, pick one of these orders, and then I see employee ID here is Margaret Peacock, and now it navigates here and it selects Margaret Peacock. So I didn't make a detail screen for the employee, but I could have navigated there. And you can see, because this item is already registered here, we do get the update here. There was a question about, the highlight here, because this item is stored in as pertaining to the Navbar or the side nav. It does highlight that. So in that case, it gets picked up. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it. I could keep going. I could make it searchable, et cetera, but I think that you get the idea that there's really not a lot of work there. You can go pretty quickly. It takes a lot longer to explain than it does to do it. Any more questions?
Yep, I got one here about navigation. Mm-hmm. How many steps will it remember to go forward or backwards?
Oh, okay.
Or can you configure that?
Yeah, so if you check out the wiki, there's some info on that. I think it's 500. I'm just going off the top of my head here. Navigation history. Wow. 500, right? Because it doesn't really, it doesn't have to do with, I mean, it's cached by ID, so it doesn't keep forms in memory if forms want to fall out of memory. Servoid has a very mature way of memory management, both for data and screens, and there's not much you can do to corrupt that, so don't worry about that. But if you wanted to kind of limit that, you could by setting this MAC history length, so you can configure that. And by the way, this is the project site that I put on the useful links there, the GitHub project with the wiki, and I really just followed these steps in order to build what I built. What else?
So for people that get lost really easily, they can go back 500 steps.
Yes.
Interesting. Let's see. What would need to be considered to implement the same navigation events but on multiple forms shown in tabs? And are tabs recommended?
Okay, so the question is about kind of taking the same approach here, but instead of doing maybe menu items here, you do tabs. The steps that you would take would be to use the parts of the API that I demonstrated. Basically, the API is really lightweight. If you actually go and look at the code, there's not much code there, not that you have to look at the code. But if you look at the public methods, and maybe it just helps to look here, here's the top level functions, right? There's not many of them. And what you want to do is you want to call the navigation open event. You want to call the, I'll stay back here, call the navigation open event that you saw in a lot of these, this svyNavigation open, and that navigates to something. Now, what the implementation of that is depends on how you handle it. And in the UX template we made here, we're using that navigation listener. So there was another case where I was listening for navigation events when I was trying to block them from leaving when they had. So if we look again at the customer detail screen, when I was editing, I have this on navigation handler that I registered in the on show. But you could have a tab form that registers a listener, and then when you receive a navigation event, then you show the right tab. So that what that gives you is, rather than saying I want to go over to this form here and I want to muck with its tabs and totally breaking encapsulation, what you can do is say, hey, I want to navigate to this form, let the UI implement it the way it's designed to, and it doesn't matter, if it's tabs or if it's a menu. So very easily you could switch the UX implementation from a side nav type of thing to a tab panel type of thing. And in fact, I've seen a customer of ours that they had both at the same time with a lot of other stuff. So they got pretty complex with it, where they had tabs inside the screen, but the main navigation was still on the left, and they were able to keep track of that via navigation. So it's a matter of just using the API the right way, but we also don't want to just give you an API with nothing to go on. So we give you this by default. If there's interest in other UX templates, we'd be happy to pursue those too. And we sort of pick those up through customers we work directly with to see what types of things they want to do. And there are other patterns that we do see that, but this is the simplest one. This is our MVP, if you will, and we do plan to enhance this with different kinds of templates, if you will.
Okay. Got another question here as well. Mm-hmm. Can submenu items work the same way? And when you use the history, will it select the submenu item?
Yes. I didn't show any submenus, but I could have done. I think, if you go back in the archives, I did a demo of the side nav component when it was new a long time ago, and I did show how to do submenus. And in that case, I think I had a products menu, and then in the submenus, I had all of the product categories like beverages, produce, etc. And then when you would click on it, it would change the list here. So rather than even navigating to a screen, you don't even have to show a form. You could call a function or something, or you could navigate to the same form but with the different filters. So not only can you do submenus and will it keep track of it in the navigation, but those could pertain to different data in the same form. It doesn't have to just be this kind of like customer orders thing. That's just the easiest one to show.
Okay. John, if this answers your question, perfect. If not, feel free to send an email to Sean or me, and we will look up that other webinar where Sean demoed this. All right, then I got another one here that was actually posted in the beginning of the webinar. Can I use this for deep links as well? I don't know what the this is.
Okay, I think I understand. So in Servoy, you can, for those of you out there who don't know what deep links are, in Servoy, you can open a navigation with the URL having some information in it, such that the application does something. Maybe it runs some functionality, or it navigates directly to a particular screen, right? Suppose you get an email with a deep link into it that says your order has been approved, and then you want to click on it, and it takes you right in here and it loads the order. So the question is, can I take advantage of this by using a deep link and navigate essentially from a deep link? And the answer is yeah, absolutely. That was a great question. If I would have had that question before preparing this, I would have put that in here because it's not much work to do. And so you handle your deep link, and then you can just call scopes svyNavigation open. Possibly you could even come up with a mapping so that you just have one deep link that maps different URL fragments to different resources with different filters or selectors, that sort of thing.
All right, that was it, Sean?
Yeah, those are great questions.
Awesome. Well, that's it. I think everybody's ready to start the holidays.
All righty.
Thanks for all the webinars that you've done this year. We're gonna post this one as soon as we can as well. Are you going to do another webinar before the end of the year?
Nope.
What? So when's the next one?
I think January 15th. So it's not the first Wednesday, but or not the second Wednesday, but the third one.
Okay. We'll make sure that everybody gets an update of the new dates.
Yeah, and I think what we'll probably be showing is some stuff that we didn't get through in this mini series, because we have some other really interesting stuff related to sample solutions.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Happy holidays. See you guys early next year. Stay warm, stay safe.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sean.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, bye.